When my grandfather died, my cousin walked away with his lake house, his investment accounts, and his name on the deed to a downtown property worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. I got a greenhouse, not a working one, a broken, abandoned greenhouse on the edge of a county road that nobody drove down anymore, with cracked glass panels, rusted frames, and weeds growing up through the concrete floor. My husband looked at the paperwork the attorney handed me and actually laughed. Not a small laugh. A real one, like I had just told him a joke at the wrong moment. He shook his head and said the only thing he ever said when something disappointed him. "Of course," he said. "Of course, that's what you got. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and I spent the last 4 years believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and asked for little enough, the people around me would eventually see my worth. That belief cost me more than I can explain in a single sitting. But let me try. Before I tell you what I found inside that greenhouse, make sure you hit like and subscribe, because what happened next is something I still have trouble believing myself. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My grandfather, Walt, was not a man who showed affection easily. He was the kind of person who expressed love through practicality. He fixed things. He showed up. He remembered the one detail you mentioned once in passing and brought it back to you months later as a gift. When I was 12, I told him I liked the smell of soil after rain. He laughed and said I had farmer blood. I didn't think much of it then. For the last 2 years of his life, he had been quietly settling his affairs. My cousin Rachel, who had always been the family favorite, the one who went to the right school and married the right man and sent Christmas cards with matching outfits, had been very present during that time. Visiting every weekend, bringing food, sitting with him on the porch. I don't begrudge her that. She loved him in her way. But I also know that presence and proximity have a way of shaping decisions in the final chapter of someone's life. When the attorney read the will, I watched Rachel's face. Calm, expectant, not surprised. When my grandfather's lake house went to her, she nodded like someone receiving a package they had already tracked online. When his accounts were divided, she smiled graciously. And then my portion was read. The Whitmore Road greenhouse and the parcel of land it sits on, approximately 4.2 acres, will pass to my granddaughter Claire. Rachel looked at me with something I can only describe as careful sympathy. The kind of look you give someone when you feel sorry for them, but don't want it to show too clearly. My husband Marcus sat beside me and didn't reach for my hand. He stared at the desk in front of him like the wood grain had suddenly become very interesting. On the drive home, he said nothing for 11 miles. I counted the mile markers. Then he exhaled through his nose, the way he always did before saying something he had decided was final. "Your grandfather spent his whole life building something," he said. "And he left you a pile of broken glass." I didn't answer. "Rachel is going to sell that lake house and double her money inside of a year," he continued. "And we're going to be paying to demolish a greenhouse that hasn't been used since before you were born." I looked out the window. The county road was empty. Flat land on both sides, scrubby trees, the occasional farm structure set back from the road. "It's still land," I said quietly. He laughed again. That same laugh. Short, final, like a door closing. That night, after dinner, after our daughter was asleep, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me in the way he had been looking at me more and more in recent months. Like I was a problem he hadn't fully solved yet. "You know what your problem is, Claire?" he said. I kept washing dishes. "You accept whatever you're given," he said. "You never push for what you deserve. Rachel pushes. That's why she ends up with the lake house. You sit quietly and smile and end up with 4 acres of weeds." I turned off the faucet. "Maybe my grandfather had a reason," I said. Marcus shook his head. "He had a favorite. And it wasn't you." I dried my hands. I didn't say anything else. But something shifted in me that night. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. A decision forming somewhere below the surface, not ready yet to be named. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning when Marcus was at a golf game he hadn't invited me to in 2 years, I drove out to Whitmore Road. The greenhouse sat at the back of the property, separated from the road by a long, cracked driveway and a field of overgrown grass. From the outside, it looked like something forgotten. The glass panels across the roof were clouded with years of grime, and several had been replaced at some point with sheets of plywood. The metal frame had gone orange at the joints. A padlock hung on the front door that I had to wiggle twice before the key I had found in the envelope from the attorney finally caught and turned. The smell inside hit me first. Earth and rust, and something faintly sweet underneath it all, like the ghost of plants that had once lived there. Broken clay pots sat in rows along the benches. Old soil spilled across the floor. In the far corner, someone had set up a folding table that had since warped from moisture. A tin box sat on top of it, and beside the tin box was a small envelope with my name on it, written in my grandfather's handwriting. I stood there for a moment without moving. He had known I would come. He had known I would come alone. And he had left something for me. I walked slowly to the table. My hands were steadier than I expected. I picked up the envelope first. Inside was a single key, small and flat, and a folded piece of paper. I read the paper before I opened the box. "Claire," it said. "If you are reading this, then you came. I knew you would. You were always the one who looked closer." I pressed my lips together and kept reading. "I know what the will looks like from the outside. I need you to trust me the way you trusted me when you were 12 and I told you the soil here was worth something." I wasn't talking about farming. I opened the tin box with the second key. Inside was a folder, thick with documents, and a yellow legal pad covered in my grandfather's careful handwriting. The folder held letters. County planning letters. Engineering surveys. A preliminary notice from a development company I had never heard of, dated 14 months ago. And at the bottom, a formal letter of interest for land acquisition on and around Whitmore Road. I sat down on a broken bench that shifted under my weight. I read every page twice. Then I read my grandfather's notes on the legal pad. He had written it all out in simple language, the way he explained everything. Like he was telling me how an engine worked. The county approved a regional logistics corridor 18 months ago. A major distribution hub, the kind that anchors an entire commercial zone, was slated for construction 3 miles east. The access road required to reach it from the interstate would run directly through Whitmore Road. Properties along that corridor would be rezoned from agricultural to commercial use. The developers had already made quiet inquiries along the route. One company had contacted him directly. He had declined every inquiry. Why? I read on the legal pad. Because you don't sell the land before the rezoning is finalized. You wait. You negotiate from strength, not urgency. And you make sure the right person is holding the deed when the time comes. He had written one more line at the bottom. Rachel would have sold it the same week. You won't. I sat in that greenhouse for a long time. Outside, a truck passed on the county road. The sound of it faded and the silence came back. I looked up through the clouded glass at the flat gray sky above me. My grandfather had not given me the smallest piece. He had given me the most patient one. I folded everything carefully, put it all back in the tin box, locked it, took both keys, and I sat there thinking about what to do next. Because I was not going to make the same mistake that the comments on my life had been warning against for years. I was not going to tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I had. On Monday, I called a real estate attorney. Not the family attorney who had handled the will. A different one. A woman named Patricia, whose name I had found through a local bar association referral, someone with no connection to anyone I knew. I drove to her office on my lunch break and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked to see the documents. I had photographed everything on my phone. She scrolled through each image carefully. "Your grandfather was well informed," she said finally. "He was careful," I said. She looked up. The rezoning application was submitted to the county 8 months ago. It's in the public comment phase right now, which means it hasn't been finalized, but the corridor plan has been in place for over 2 years. This land sits directly in the commercial access zone. What does that mean in terms of value? She set the phone down. Agricultural land on Whitmore Road right now is worth roughly $12,000 to $15,000 per acre. Once the rezoning is finalized and that access corridor is confirmed, comparable parcels in similar situations have sold for anywhere between $80,000 and $150,000 per acre. You have 4.2 acres. I did the math slowly in my head. And the development company that contacted my grandfather, I said. Are they still active in the area? I can find out, she said. But before you speak to anyone, I want to talk to you about one other thing. I waited. You're married, she said. In this state, inherited property is generally protected from division in a divorce. But if you commingle those assets, if you use marital funds to develop or improve the property, that protection becomes complicated. If there's any instability in your marriage, you should know your options before you take any public steps with this land. I looked at the window behind her desk. Outside, the street was busy with lunch traffic. What would you recommend? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Document the inheritance clearly and separately. Don't invest marital funds into the property. And if the instability I'm sensing in your pause is real, consider speaking to a family attorney before you move forward publicly with any sale or negotiation. I drove home that afternoon with my hands steady on the wheel. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, exactly. Clarity. Like the fog that had been sitting over everything for years was beginning to lift at the edges. That evening, Marcus complained about dinner. He complained about a bill that had come in. He told me my cousin Rachel had invited us to a dinner party at her new place next month, the kind of casual cruelty that he delivered without seeming to notice the weight of it. I nodded and cleared the table and said nothing. He did not ask about the greenhouse. He had already decided it wasn't worth asking about. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I met with a family attorney, separately, on my own. I made sure every document related to my inheritance was in my name alone, filed and recorded correctly. I opened a separate account that Marcus didn't have access to. I spoke with Patricia twice more, and on her recommendation, I reached out, quietly, to 2 development companies who had active projects in the county corridor. The first company responded within 48 hours. The second responded the same day. I was not a grieving woman sitting on worthless land. I was a landowner in a commercial rezoning corridor, and they knew exactly what that meant. I scheduled both meetings for the same week, a Tuesday and a Thursday, during work hours when Marcus thought I was at my regular job. I wore my good blazer. I drove myself. I did not tell anyone where I was going. The first meeting was with a regional development firm. 3 people sat across from me at a conference table, and I watched their expressions as they pulled up the county corridor map and placed my parcel on it. The senior developer, a man in his 50s named Howard, tapped the map twice. "This is a corner parcel," he said. "Once the access road is completed, this sits at the first major intersection point before the hub. That's significant." "I know," I said. He looked at me with a new quality of attention that I recognized. It was the way people looked at you when they had recalibrated who you were. "We'd like to make an offer," he said. "I'd like to hear it," I said. The number he placed in front of me was more than Marcus had earned in the last 3 years combined. I told him I needed 2 weeks. The second meeting was similar, except their offer was higher. They wanted to move faster. I told them the same thing. 2 weeks. On the drive home from the second meeting, I called Patricia. "You have competing offers," she said. "That's the position your grandfather wanted you to be in." "I know," I said. "I understand now why he waited." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish what he started," I said. That Friday evening, Marcus came home energized from something at work. He was in a better mood than usual, the kind of good mood that made him expansive and careless with words. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the counter and told me that Rachel's husband had closed on a piece of commercial property and made a significant return in under a year. "That's how you build wealth," he said. "You put yourself in the right position." I said. Not sitting on 4 acres of broken glass waiting for something to happen. I looked at him. "What if something already happened?" He tilted his head. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice even. "I've had 2 meetings this week with development companies interested in the Whitmore Road property." The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "The county is rezoning the corridor for commercial use. My grandfather's land sits at a primary access intersection. I have 2 written offers on the table." He set the glass down. "Claire, that land is worth nothing." "The first offer was for $412,000, I said. "The second was for $480. The room was very quiet. Marcus stared at me. I watched his face move through several expressions in quick succession. Disbelief. Recalculation. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the version of himself he was before all the years of careful dismissal had settled into habit. "That's not possible," he said. "My grandfather knew about the rezoning 2 years ago," I said. "He declined every early inquiry. He waited for the right moment and left the land to the person he trusted to wait with it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We should talk to a financial advisor together. Figure out the best way to handle this as a couple." I looked at him carefully. I had been looking at him carefully for 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks I had also been looking at myself carefully, at the years of small erosions, the comments that accumulated like sediment, the way I had learned to make myself smaller to avoid the friction of being seen as too much, too expectant, too in need of something he had decided not to give. "I've already spoken with an attorney," I said. "The inherited property is in my name. The offers are to me." He took a step toward me. His voice shifted into the tone he used when he wanted to seem reasonable, while making it clear that only one answer was acceptable. "Claire, we're a family. What's yours is ours. My grandfather didn't leave it to us," I said quietly. "He left it to me." That night I moved into the guest room. 3 days later, I filed the paperwork my family attorney had already prepared. Marcus did not see it coming. That was the part that told me everything I needed to know. That even at that moment he had not updated his understanding of who I was. He still saw the woman who washed dishes without answering back. He had not noticed the woman who had been meeting with attorneys and developers for 3 weeks. My cousin Rachel called me 10 days later. Her voice had a different quality than usual, careful in a new way. "I heard you got some offers on the greenhouse property," she said. "I did," I said. "That land was worth nothing when grandfather left it to you," she said. Not quite a question. "It didn't look like much," I agreed. There was a pause. "Howard from Meridian called my husband about land in the corridor. He mentioned your parcel. He said you had a very clear sense of what you were doing." "My grandfather was thorough," I said. Another pause. Longer. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I thought he'd given you the short end." "So did everyone," I said. That was kind of the point. I didn't say it unkindly, because I understood that Rachel had made the calculations anyone would make with the information available. She had seen an old greenhouse. She had seen a grieving woman in a quiet marriage with no particular leverage. She had seen what she expected to see, and so had everyone else. That's the thing about being underestimated. It requires no effort on your part. People do it completely on their own. 6 weeks after my grandfather's will was read, I signed a development agreement with Meridian Group. I did not sell the land outright. I negotiated a ground lease with a purchase option. The structure Patricia had advised me to explore, which gave me ongoing income from the land while preserving my right to repurchase or renegotiate when the corridor was fully built out. The signing bonus alone was more than the lake house Rachel had received in the will. I also kept a small portion of the parcel, the corner nearest the road, under my direct control. Patricia had pointed out that corner parcels at major intersections tended to appreciate faster than surrounding land once development began. I was learning to think the way my grandfather had thought. Not about what something was worth today, but about what it would be worth to the right person at the right time. My daughter was with me the day I drove back out to Whitmore Road after signing. She's 7, at the age where she asks the kind of direct questions adults spend years learning to avoid. She looked at the greenhouse through the car window and then looked at me. "Is that ours?" she asked. "Part of it," I said. "The rest is becoming something new." "What's it becoming?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But it's going to be busy." She thought about that. "Did great-grandpa give it to you?" "He did." "Was it broken when he gave it to you?" "It looked broken," I said. "From the outside." She turned back to the window. A surveying crew was out in the field behind the greenhouse, their equipment set up against the flat gray sky. She watched them for a moment the way children watch things they find quietly impressive, without saying anything. On the way home, she asked if she could keep the small key I had found in the envelope, the one that had opened the tin box. I had been carrying it in my purse since the day I found it. I looked at it for a moment in my palm. The metal was worn smooth on the grip, the way things get when they've been held often by someone who is thinking carefully. I gave it to her. The day the divorce was finalized, Marcus asked me once more if we could talk. He said it in the parking lot of the courthouse, standing next to a car I didn't recognize, wearing a jacket I had never seen. He had been doing a lot of self-renovation in the months since everything came out. I had noticed. I wasn't unmoved by it. But I had learned something from my grandfather that I needed to apply here too. You don't negotiate from sentiment. You negotiate from clarity. I think we've said what needed to be said, I told him. He nodded. Once. There was no anger left in his face. Just the particular tiredness of someone who had spent a long time running a certain kind of calculation and had finally arrived at the correct result. I drove home the long way, past Whitmore Road. The surveying crew had finished their preliminary work, and the first stages of grading had begun. The greenhouse still stood at the back of the property, fenced off now, waiting to be cleared. I had asked the development team to give me one last walkthrough before they took it down. I wanted to stand in that space one more time. I wanted to remember what it looked like when it was just broken glass and rust and overgrown silence. When no one thought it was worth anything. When someone who loved me believed in it anyway and waited patiently for the right person to come along and see what he had always seen. He gave it to me because he knew I would come on a quiet Saturday morning with no one watching. He knew I would read every page of every document. He knew I would sit on a warped bench in the smell of old earth and think carefully before I spoke. He gave it to me because he knew I would wait. The morning they broke ground, I stood at the edge of the property with my daughter beside me. She was holding her small key. The machines moved in slow arcs across the field, and the sound of them carried far in the flat morning air. She reached up and took my hand, without looking at me. I thought about the night Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway and told me I accepted whatever I was given. I thought about the parking lot of the attorney's office where I sat in my car for 10 minutes before going in, steadying myself. I thought about the folded note on a warped table in a room that smelled like memory. He wasn't giving me the smallest piece. He was giving me the one that required the most patience to carry. And he had known, in the way that certain people who love you quietly and without announcement will sometimes know you better than you know yourself, that patience was the one thing I had never run out of. I squeezed my daughter's hand. She squeezed back. The machines kept moving. The ground opened up. And what had once looked like nothing at all began, slowly and then all at once, to become exactly what it was always meant to be.